So you're thinking of a case for your fancy new computer, or maybe your old one just isn't performing how you'd like, and the temperatures are running up more often than you really think they should. Well, how about today? Let's take a look at an open air versus closed computer case. Now, personally, I've run into both. In fact, I've used closed cases that were pre-built from manufacturers, ones that I built myself, and open air cases for both. My experience, short of it, an open air case is less of a hassle and has better thermals. That is, if you don't really care about dust, noise, or really aesthetics in general. Now, sure, you can take the time to reduce noise from fans and pumps to a minimum and really cable manage and get the right open air case that gives you a nice, pleasing look. But you'll never escape dust and just general electrical noise, especially something like coil whine on your graphics card. And eventually, you'll have to have some sort of fan to keep your graphics card, CPU, and just your overall system cool when you're under load. So sure, if you can get over those little hang-ups here and there, then an open situation seems fine and a closed case may be pushed off into the back of your mind. But think about it. Cases may be more of an initial hassle to put and fit everything together, now sure, but the payoffs can be huge if done properly. Now notice I didn't say lazily. Spending hard-earned money on a well-reviewed case doesn't guarantee positive results. Like all things good in life, time and effort are key ingredients in the recipe for success, but a lot of it can come down to specific case used for any build. And, now generally speaking, a clean aesthetic with decent cable management and positive pressure airflow can, and probably will, lead to a better overall experience. A case that has fan filters, especially magnetic ones on the intakes, can drastically reduce the time between cleaning out the dust inside. And having a closed environment means that any noise has an extra barrier to go through before reaching your ears. Something that's nice for those who use speakers over headphones. Though, on the downside, if you need to access anything on the inside that has been cable managed to the back or underneath of the case, then there could be a bit of hassle to access it. Not to mention, especially compared to most open air situations, a closed case is going to have a much larger footprint if you choose to place it on your desk. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. It really depends on my mood, as probably a lot of people. And speaking of accessing anything on the inside, this is something that should be always taken with precaution. A closed case may offer protection from youngsters accidentally touching components, or even, in a worst case scenario, can be at least somewhat of a barrier from stuff spilling on your build. But these are things that can happen to anyone, whether it's open air or closed. Though, let's be honest, an open air case is much more susceptible to finger prodding, pet licking, or overall mishandling and accidental damage scenarios. No judgment, it's just that things don't always end up where they're supposed to be. Now, for me, the biggest upside of the open air case was, and probably still is, when I use it for a test bench. I can quickly and easily put it in and out exactly what I need, and honestly, nowadays, I just put it on a wood base and go from there to test out whenever it needs to be done. Heck, even just using the box that your motherboard came in is a very common open air scenario that pretty much everyone does for testing and posting their builds before even putting it in a case. So, from a pure thermal standpoint, yeah, an open air setup will provide unfettered access to the surrounding cool air, but for me and pretty much everyone else out there, it's not worth the trade-off. And not to mention that sometimes, just like with improperly cases, you could end up with very turbulent air around key components that essentially just recirculate their own hot mess. Without proper airflow to ensure cool air is getting to where it needs to be, your components could be even worse off than if they were in a properly cooled case. And, just a brief note about blower style reference coolers versus non-reference coolers. The blower style, they're going to take that hot air in the case and blow it right out the back, whereas a non-reference cooler is going to circulate that air inside the case if you don't have the proper airflow to bring cool air in and exhaust all the rest. If not, non-reference cooler can really cause turbulent air and drive up temperatures for everything. Though, properly done, non-reference are usually the way to go, especially when you consider the noise that a ramped up reference blower causes. Now, I'm not going to get into too many benchmark details, because there are plenty of other videos getting into the nitty-gritty dirty number duels, but I will let you know my personal experience in testing. I started with a solid baseline of 30, 35, and 28C at idle for my graphics card, CPU, and motherboard respectively, with the case closed, like the majority of builds out there, and with the graphics card fan at 30%, since not all graphics cards are able to disable the fans while at idle temps, and I wanted to be as fair as possible. And the CPU and case fans were running at their minimum that my fan controller allows. And just by the way, with everything idling out in the open, I was looking at 30, 34, and 28 degrees, so NIRS makes little difference, the same for both. Now, I did follow up by cranking both Heaven Benchmark 4.0 and AIDA64 to get a solid stress on both the graphics card and CPU simultaneously to see the numbers. First up, that's a closed case, allowing the graphics card, CPU, and case fans to ramp up accordingly. Mainly the graphics card and a nice 1-to-1 fan speed temperature ratio. After 10 minutes, I got 53 on the graphics card, 54 on the CPU, and still 28 for the motherboard. Interesting, but not much to go on without anything to compare to, so I took off the side panel and waited another 10 minutes, which gave me 56 on the graphics, 51 on the CPU, and that 28 again for the motherboard. Well, it seems that the graphics card went up 3 degrees, and that's due to the front fan's cool airflow going to waste, escaping out the gaping hole where the side panel used to be, and not being able to fully reach the fans for intake on the graphics card. So now for one last test, running them completely open air without a fan directly blowing on anything, save for the CPU fans for the radiator, which for at least one part, it gets kind of interesting. After the last 10 minutes of stressing, I came up with 54 on the graphics, with the same really, 49 on the CPU, I'll get back to that, and yep, you guessed it, oh, it's actually 29 for the motherboard. It seems that lack of airflow from the fans does make a difference, huh? So now getting back to the CPU temps and why being open air seemed to still make a difference. I'm thinking that I may have an issue with my water pump, or perhaps a blockage of some sort in the line, and there isn't enough flow getting to the radiator. I say this because it seems that whenever I lay the motherboard down flat, as opposed to it being upright in the case, and therefore the water pump is attached to it, the CPU temps drop quickly by several degrees, and interestingly, maybe something that I can explore in a future video. But for now, those are the results I ended up with, showing a bit more of what it's like to run closed, open, and completely open air. So I hope I've made this topic a little clearer for some of you out there. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to drop them below. If you haven't already and you like what you see, think about hitting like and subscribe. And if you have, well, I'm Steven, and thanks for stopping by.